Have you ever prayed for something with all your heart, believing, trusting, waiting, only to be met with silence? Have you ever knocked on a door that just wouldn't open? You fasted, you cried, you stood on his promises, and yet nothing moved. It's in these moments that doubt creeps in. Did God hear me? Did I do something wrong? Why won't he answer? But let me tell you something. Just because the door isn't opening doesn't mean God isn't working. Sometimes he's protecting you, sometimes he's testing you, and sometimes, oh, somebody needs to hear this. Sometimes he's waiting on you to take action. Today we're going to talk about those moments when heaven seems quiet, when the door stays shut, when you're left wondering, Lord, what do I do now? Because I came to tell somebody, you may be standing in front of a door that won't open, but that doesn't mean the story is over. God has a plan, and we're about to uncover it. Are you ready? Let's go. We serve a God who hears, who sees, and who knows every need before we even ask. We serve a God who spoke the world into existence, who parted the Red Sea, who made manna fall from the sky, who raised the dead and healed the sick with just a word. And yet, there are times when we call on his name, and the heavens seem silent. There are moments when we cry out in desperation, and it feels like our prayers hit the ceiling and fall right back into our lap. What do you do when you know he has the power, but he doesn't move the way you expected? What do you do when you've been faithful, you've been obedient, you've done everything you know to do, and yet the answer doesn't come the way you envision? See, we love to talk about the God who opens doors, but we don't always know what to do with the God who keeps them shut. We love to declare, ask and it shall be given, seek and you shall find, knock and the door shall be opened. But what happens when you knock and knock and knock and the only response is silence? What happens when you are standing in front of a door that refuses to budge? Oh, I know this is not the kind of message we like to hear. We like instant results, quick turnarounds, and immediate breakthroughs, but there's something about the nature of God that we must understand. He is not a vending machine that spits out blessings on demand. He is not a genie that grants every wish the moment we rub the lamp of prayer. No, no, no. He is a sovereign God, a God of wisdom, a God of timing, a God who sees what we cannot see and knows what we do not know. Sometimes the delay is a denial, it's development. Sometimes the wait isn't a punishment, it's a preparation. Because you see, there are things that God is working out behind the scenes that you cannot comprehend. You may think you're ready for the thing you're asking for, but God knows the weight of the blessing, and he won't put something in your hands that you don't have the strength to carry. Oh, I feel this for somebody right now. You've been asking for elevation, but God sees that if he lifts you too soon, the weight of the responsibility will crush you. You've been asking for increase, but he knows that your character is still being shaped. You've been asking for an open door, but God knows that there's an enemy on the other side waiting for you, and he is keeping you hidden until the appointed time. You see, God doesn't just answer prayers, he aligns them. He doesn't just give you what you ask for, he gives you what you need. And sometimes that means he withholds the thing you think you want because he has something better in store. Look at the life of Joseph. He had a dream, a vision from God that he would be a ruler, that he would be elevated. But when he prayed for that dream to come to pass, he didn't go straight to the palace. He went to prison. He was betrayed. He was lied on. He was forgotten. Can you imagine how many times Joseph must have cried out to God? Lord, you showed me the vision, but why does it look like my life is moving in the opposite direction? What Joseph didn't realize was that the delays, the detours, the disappointments were all a part of God's plan to develop him. Because if God had given him the throne too soon, he wouldn't have had the wisdom, the endurance, the faith and the maturity to stay there. God had to process him, mold him, refine him in the fire of affliction so that when the door finally opened, He wouldn't just walk into the blessing, he would have the character to handle it. And that's what God is doing in your life right now. You've been asking, you've been waiting, you've been knocking, and it feels like heaven is silent. But don't mistake silence for absence. God is not ignoring you. God has not abandoned you. God is working. He is shifting. He is arranging every detail in such a way that when he finally opens that door, nothing and no one will be able to shut it. Because here's the thing about God. When he does answer, when he does move, when he does release what you've been praying for, it will be exceedingly abundantly above all you could ever ask or think. But until that moment comes, you've got to trust that the same God who opens doors is the same God who keeps them closed for a reason. We don't like closed doors. We don't like hearing no. We don't like waiting. We don't like rejection, because in our minds, if we desire something, if we pray for something, if we believe for something, then surely it should be ours. Surely if God loves us, he should say yes. Surely if we have faith, the door should swing wide open. But what if I told you that the thing you are crying over, the opportunity that slipped through your fingers, the relationship that didn't work out, the job that rejected you, the deal that fell through, wasn't a loss, but a blessing? What if I told you that God's no was actually a form of protection? What if I told you that the door you were desperate to walk through would have led you into a storm that you were never meant to endure? We have a limited perspective. We can only see what's right in front of us. We judge situations based on our feelings, based on our emotions, based on what we think is best. But God, oh, somebody hear me today, God sees the whole picture. He sees the trap set ahead of you. He sees the battles that would have drained you. He sees the heartbreak that would have broken you beyond repair. And because he is a loving father, because he cares too much to let you walk into something that would destroy you, he blocks it. He shuts the door. He removes the option. You thought it was a missed opportunity, but God was shielding you from something that wasn't meant for you. You thought it was rejection, but it was divine protection. That person you wanted to marry, oh, you were in love, you were convinced they were the one, but God saw their heart. He saw the deception. He saw the dysfunction. He saw the pain that was coming, and so he let it in before it destroyed you. That business deal that looked perfect, that seemed like everything you prayed for, that promised success, God knew the hidden motives, the unseen risks, the disaster that was waiting, and he blocked it before it could collapse on you. See, we don't understand the doors God closes until later. It's not until years down the road that we look back and say, Lord, thank you for not letting that happen. Thank you for saving me from that mistake. Thank you for blocking what I thought I wanted, because if we had gotten what we asked for, if we had forced that door open, we would have walked into something we weren't prepared for. Look at the Israelites when they left Egypt. They were excited. They were ready. They thought their journey to the promised land would be quick and easy. But Exodus 13:17 says that God did not take them the shorter route through Philistine territory, even though it was the direct path. Why? Because he knew that if they faced war too soon, they would turn back. So he closed that door. He took them the long way, the harder way, because he knew it was the safer way. And that's what God does in our lives. He closes doors that seem good on the surface, but carry hidden dangers beneath. He blocks paths that would lead us into battles we aren't prepared to fight. He reroutes us. He detours us. He delays us, not to hurt us, but to protect us. But the problem is, we don't always see it that way. When a door closes, our first reaction is disappointment. We get frustrated. We get discouraged. We start questioning God. Lord, why did you let this happen? Why didn't you make a way? Why am I stuck here when I could have been there? What we fail to realize is that some doors look beautiful on the outside, but are filled with destruction on the other side. Some opportunities seem like breakthroughs, but they're really breakdowns waiting to happen. Some relationships appear perfect, but beneath the surface they carry pain that we were never meant to endure. If God let you get that promotion, it might have drained you so much that you lost your family. If He let you move into that city, you might have been surrounded by influences that pulled you away from Him. If He had answered your prayer the way you wanted, it might have led you into a storm that could have broken you beyond repair. So instead of crying over closed doors, instead of questioning why it didn't work out, instead of doubting whether God cares, maybe it's time to shift your perspective. Maybe it's time to recognize that God's no is sometimes His greatest mercy. Maybe it's time to trust that if He blocked it, it's because He has something better. Maybe it's time to understand that the doors that won't open are just as much a part of His plan as the doors that do. Frustration is a part of life. It's that gnawing feeling that creeps in when things don't go the way you planned, when the answer you were expecting never comes, when the door you thought would open stays shut and you're left standing there wondering why. It's the disappointment that sets in. When you've given your all, when you've prayed, when you've believed, when you've done everything you know to do, only to be met with resistance, with silence, with delay. And let's be honest, faith is easy when everything is going right. Faith is simple when the path is clear, when the doors are opening, when the favor of God is flowing, when the blessings are showing up. But real faith, the kind of faith that moves mountains, the kind of faith that shapes destinies, the kind of faith that produces testimonies, is the faith that refuses to break under the weight of frustration. It's the faith that says, even though I don't see it yet, I still believe. Even though I don't understand it, I still trust. Even though I'm tired, even though I'm weary, even though I don't feel like pressing on, I will not quit. See, frustration is the breeding ground for doubt. When things don't happen on our timeline, when the promise takes longer than expected, when the breakthrough feels out of reach, that's when the enemy whispers, maybe God forgot about you. Maybe you heard Him wrong. Maybe it's not going to happen. And if you're not careful, frustration will talk you out of what faith is trying to walk you into. Look at Abraham. God gave him a promise, told him that he would be the father of many nations. And yet, year after year passed and nothing happened. His wife Sarah was getting older. His body was getting weaker. And in the natural, it looked impossible. The promise looked delayed. The fulfillment seemed out of reach. Frustration was creeping in, and at one point Sarah got so frustrated that she tried to help God by offering her servant Hagar to Abraham, because surely if the promise wasn't coming through her, then maybe God needed some assistance. How many times do we try to help God when frustration sets in? How many times do we take matters into our own hands because we think maybe God is taking too long? How many times do we compromise, settle, or step outside of His will because waiting feels too difficult? But here's the thing about faith. It's not based on how things look. It's not based on when things happen. It's not based on whether or not the situation makes sense. Faith is believing even when the odds are stacked against you. Faith is standing firm even when frustration is pressing in on every side. Because let me tell you something, delay does not mean denial. Just because the promise hasn't come to pass yet doesn't mean it's not coming. Just because you don't see it yet doesn't mean God isn't working behind the scenes. Just because you feel stuck in frustration doesn't mean that God has abandoned you. Think about Joseph. He had a dream as a young man, a vision that one day he would be in a position of power, that one day he would rise above his circumstances. But instead of stepping into that promise immediately, he was thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, wrongfully accused, locked in prison for a crime he didn't commit. If anybody had a reason to be frustrated, it was Joseph. If anybody had a reason to give up, it was Joseph. But do you know what Joseph did? He remained faithful, even in the prison, even in the waiting. Even in the middle of his frustration, he trusted that God was still in control. He trusted that the same God who gave him the dream was the same God who would bring it to pass. He refused to let frustration steal his faith. And that's what you've got to do. You've got to make up your mind that no matter how long it takes, no matter how hard it gets, no matter how much frustration tries to overwhelm you, your faith will not waver. Because faith is what pushes you past frustration. Faith is what carries you through the waiting season. Faith is what keeps you moving forward when everything in you wants to quit. You may be in a season right now where it feels like nothing is working, where frustration is hitting you from every angle, where you're wondering if God even hears you. But don't let frustration rob you of your faith. Don't let delays make you doubt what God has spoken. Don't let obstacles convince you that it's over, because when faith rises above frustration, when you refuse to give up, when you stand firm on God's promises no matter what, that is when doors begin to open. That is when breakthroughs begin to manifest. That is when you see that God was working all along. Prayer is powerful. Prayer is necessary. Prayer is the foundation of our faith, the lifeline of our relationship with God, the connection that keeps us aligned with His will. But what happens when you pray and pray, yet nothing moves? What happens when you have asked, you have sought, you have knocked, but the door remains closed? Could it be that the answer is not in more prayer, but in taking action? There comes a time when prayer alone is not enough. There comes a moment when God is waiting on you to move. You see, we love to pray for doors to open, but we don't always want to put in the effort to push them open. We love to ask God for opportunities, but we don't always want to step out of our comfort zone and go after them. We want miracles, but we don't always want to participate in the process. Faith is not passive. Faith is not just sitting back and waiting for God to drop blessings in our lap. Faith requires movement. Faith requires obedience. Faith requires action. Look at Moses. When the Israelites were trapped between the Red Sea and Pharaoh's army, they cried out to God in panic. They prayed for deliverance. They pleaded for a miracle. And what did God say? Why do you cry to me? Tell the people to move forward. Exodus 14:15. In other words, praying time was over. Now it was time to act. The sea was still there. The obstacle had not disappeared, but God didn't tell them to wait. He told them to step out. And the moment they moved, the waters parted. Could it be that the thing you are waiting for is waiting on you? Could it be that God has already made the way, but He is waiting for you to take the first step? Too many people pray for opportunities, but never prepare for them. They pray for doors to open, but never position themselves to walk through them. They pray for increase, but never develop the skills, the discipline, the mindset to handle it. They pray for success, but are unwilling to do the work necessary to sustain it. Look at Peter. When Jesus called him out onto the water, Peter could have stayed in the boat. He could have prayed, Lord, if it's really you, make the waves stop. He could have asked, Lord, carry me across. But no, Jesus told him to come. And Peter had to make a choice. He had to move. He had to step out of the boat. The miracle didn't happen while he was sitting. The miracle happened when he moved. Some doors won't open until you turn the handle. Some breakthroughs won't come until you step out in faith. Some opportunities won't be revealed until you take the risk and trust that God will sustain you. You can't keep praying for a job but never apply anywhere. You can't keep asking God for financial freedom but never change your spending habits. You can't keep crying out for a better life but never put in the effort to make better choices. Prayer is powerful, but faith without works is dead. Think about the woman with the issue of blood. She had suffered for 12 long years. She had prayed for healing. She had waited for change, but one day she realized that if she wanted her breakthrough, she had to move. She didn't sit back and hope Jesus would come to her. No, she pressed through the crowd. She reached for his garment. She took action, and because of that, she was made whole. Blind Bartimaeus was the same way. He heard Jesus was passing by, and he could have sat there in silence, hoping Jesus would notice him. But no, he cried out. He took action, and when people tried to silence him, he cried even louder because he refused to sit back, because he refused to let fear or doubt keep him quiet. Jesus stopped and restored his sight. How many of us are waiting on God, but God is waiting on us? How many of us have been praying for years about the same thing, but we have yet to take a single step toward what we're asking for? We say we want change. We say we want elevation. We say we want to walk in our calling, but are we moving toward it? Are we putting in the work? Are we preparing for the thing we're asking for? David was anointed to be king, but he didn't just sit in the fields waiting for the throne to come to him. No, he kept working, kept fighting, kept proving himself faithful. When Goliath showed up, he didn't sit back and pray for someone else to fight. He stepped up, and because he moved in faith, the victory was his. Ruth didn't just pray for a new beginning after her husband died. She got up and followed Naomi to a new land. She didn't just sit in the house waiting for favor to find her. She went out to the fields and worked. And because she took action, God aligned her steps and positioned her for a blessing greater than she could have imagined. Elisha was plowing in the fields when Elijah called him. He wasn't sitting around waiting for God to send a prophet to find him. He was working. And because he was faithful in what he was doing, God met him in the middle of his work and took him to another level. Some of us are waiting for a sign, waiting for confirmation, waiting for God to show up in some grand way before we move. But the reality is, the door is already in front of us. The opportunity is already there. The question is, will we step out in faith? Will we take action? Will we move toward what God has for us? There are seasons when God tells us to be still, but there are also seasons when he tells us to go. And when that time comes, we cannot allow fear, doubt, or uncertainty to keep us stagnant. We cannot sit in frustration waiting for something to change when God has already given us the ability to make a move. Because at the end of the day, some doors don't open with just prayer. Some doors require action. We don't like hearing no. We don't like feeling overlooked. We don't like closed doors, unanswered prayers, or missed opportunities, because in our minds, if something didn't happen the way we expected, if we were denied, if we were turned away, then surely it must mean rejection. Surely it must mean that we weren't good enough, that we weren't qualified enough, that we weren't worthy enough. But what if I told you that what you are calling rejection is actually redirection? What if I told you that God didn't deny you? He just had a different route. See, we think that every closed door is a failure. We think that every time we don't get what we want, something is wrong. But let me tell you something. God's rejection is often his protection. God's no is not about blocking you. It's about positioning you. It's about getting you to the right place at the right time for the right purpose. We serve a God who does not waste time. We serve a God who does not make mistakes. We serve a God who sees the whole picture while we only see a small part. And sometimes the thing we are crying over, the thing we thought we needed, the thing we thought was supposed to be ours, God is saying, I have something better. I have something greater. I have something beyond what you are asking for. Look at Jonah. God told him to go to Nineveh, but Jonah had his own plans. He went in the opposite direction, got on a boat, and thought he was in control, but God sent a storm. God sent a disruption. God redirected him. Jonah thought he was just running from a task, but he was actually running from his destiny. And even when he got swallowed up by a great fish, it wasn't punishment, it was protection. Because if that storm had continued, if the waves had thrown him overboard without God's intervention, Jonah could have drowned. But instead, God made a way. God redirected him back to his assignment. How many of us are frustrated because God changed our plans? How many of us are disappointed because things didn't work out the way we envisioned? How many of us are stuck in bitterness over what we thought was rejection when in reality it was God rescuing us from something we could not see? Sometimes we are so attached to what we want that we don't realize God is saving us from something that would have destroyed us. That relationship you thought was the one, God ended it because he saw the heartbreak that was coming. That job you prayed for but didn't get, God knew the stress, the environment, the toxicity that would have drained you. That opportunity that passed you by, God knew it wasn't what you needed, and he was preparing something greater. Look at Joseph. He had a dream, a promise from God that he would be elevated, that he would be a leader, that he would rise above. But instead of promotion, he was thrown into a pit. Instead of elevation, he was sold into slavery. Instead of open doors, he was thrown into prison. If anybody had a reason to feel rejected, it was Joseph. If anybody had a reason to feel forgotten, it was Joseph. But what Joseph didn't realize at the time was that every no, every betrayal, every obstacle was actually redirecting him toward his destiny. Because if his brothers had never thrown him in the pit, he would have never been sold into Egypt. If he had never been sold, he would have never ended up in Potiphar's house. If he had never gone to Potiphar's house, he would have never been thrown into prison. And if he had never been in prison, he would have never met the cupbearer who introduced him to Pharaoh. Every setback was a setup. Every obstacle was a pathway. Every detour was divine direction. Some of us are mourning over something God never intended for us to keep. Some of us are stuck in frustration because we are holding on to an old plan, an old idea, an old expectation when God is trying to move us into something better. You are not being rejected. You are being redirected. Think about Paul. He had his plans. He wanted to go preach in Asia. He thought he knew where God was sending him, but the Holy Spirit blocked him. Acts 16:6-7 says that the Spirit of Jesus did not allow them to enter certain regions. Why? Because God had a different plan. Instead of Asia, God was sending Paul to Macedonia, where a revival was about to break out. Paul thought he was being blocked, but he was actually being repositioned. Some of us are mad at God because the plan changed. Some of us are frustrated because we thought we knew what was best and God stepped in and shifted the direction. But let me tell you something. When God redirects you, it's always for your good. When God says no to one thing, it's because he's saying yes to something better. Maybe the reason you didn't get that promotion is because God knew it would distract you from your calling. Maybe the reason that friendship ended is because God saw the deception you couldn't see. Maybe the reason you're still waiting is because God is preparing something so much greater than you could ever imagine. When you understand that redirection is not rejection, you stop crying over closed doors. You stop fighting battles that aren't yours to fight. You stop begging for things that weren't meant for you because you realize that if God blocked it, if God shifted it, if God removed it, it's because he has something better. And the problem is, too many of us are still standing at the last closed door, knocking, pleading, waiting, when God is saying, I've already moved on. I've already set something else up. I've already prepared something greater, but you can't see it because you're still focused on what didn't work. You're still stuck in what you lost. You're still mourning what you thought should have been. God is not in the business of rejection. He is in the business of redirect. He knows where you belong. He knows what you need. He knows where you're supposed to be. And when he shifts you, when he moves you, when he blocks something, it's because he is leading you towards something greater. Rejection is man's perspective, but redirection is God's plan. What looks like a loss is actually a setup. What looks like a delay is actually preparation. What looks like a missed opportunity is actually divine positioning. Because when God closes one door, he is always leading you towards something better. Persistence is what separates those who almost make it from those who actually do. It is the difference between people who dream about success and people who walk in it. Because let me tell you something, talent is great, intelligence is important, connections can help, but nothing, and I mean nothing, can take the place of persistence. Persistence is what keeps you moving when everything in you wants to quit. It's what makes you get back up after every failure, after every disappointment, after every setback. It's what pushes you past obstacles, past delays, past rejection, past opposition. Because let's be real, life is not easy. The road to purpose is not smooth. The journey to success is filled with challenges, detours, and moments where it would be so much easier to throw in the towel. But if you have persistence, you will outlast every attack, overcome every obstacle, and push through every storm. The enemy doesn't have to destroy you if he can discourage you. He doesn't have to block the promise if he can just convince you to give up before you reach it. He doesn't have to stop you. He just has to make you stop yourself. That's why some of the greatest battles you will ever fight will be in your mind. The enemy will whisper, "You've been trying for so long, why bother?" He will say, "You've prayed, you've worked, you've believed, but nothing has changed. Just quit." But let me tell you something, the only way you lose is if you stop. Look at the woman with the issue of blood. She had been bleeding for 12 years. She had spent all she had on doctors, treatments, trying everything in her power to get healed, and yet she was still suffering. Now, she could have given up. She could have said, "I've tried enough, I've done enough, maybe I'll never be healed." But instead, she made up her mind, if I can just touch the hem of his garment, I will be made whole. Do you know what that is? That's persistence. That's the kind of determination that says, I don't care what it takes. I will press through. She didn't wait for Jesus to come to her. She didn't sit back and complain about how long she had been suffering. No, she moved. She pushed, she pressed through the crowd. And because she refused to quit, because she refused to let obstacles stop her, she received her miracle. How many of us have stopped pressing? How many of us have given up because the journey has been too long? How many of us were right on the edge of a breakthrough but walked away because we let frustration win? The enemy wants you to quit before you win. He wants you to stop praying before the door opens. He wants you to stop believing before the miracle happens. He wants you to stop pressing before the breakthrough comes. But let me tell you something. Those who refuse to quit are the ones who see the promise come to pass. Look at Jacob. He wrestled with the angel of the Lord all night long. The angel even dislocated his hip, but Jacob held on. He said, "I will not let you go until you bless me." Do you have that kind of persistence? Do you have the kind of faith that says, I don't care how long it takes. I will not stop praying. I will not stop believing. I will not stop fighting until I see what God promised me, because that's the kind of persistence that gets results. That's the kind of faith that refuses to back down. That's the kind of determination that moves mountains. Look at the blind man Bartimaeus. He heard Jesus was passing by and he cried out, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And do you know what the people around him did? They told him to be quiet. They tried to shut him down. They tried to silence his voice. But did Bartimaeus stop? No, the Bible says he cried out even louder because he understood something. If he stayed silent, he would stay blind. If he let people's opinions control him, he would never receive his miracle. So he kept crying out, and because of his persistence, Jesus stopped in his tracks, called him over, and gave him his sight. How many of us have allowed people to silence our persistence? How many of us have stopped pushing because we got tired of waiting? How many of us have backed down because we let fear, doubt, and discouragement tell us it wasn't worth it? Let me remind you of something. Delay does not mean denial. Just because something hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it won't happen. Just because the answer hasn't come yet doesn't mean God isn't working. Just because the door hasn't opened yet doesn't mean it never will. But you have to keep knocking. You have to keep pushing. You have to keep pressing. Look at Elijah. God had told him that rain was coming after a long drought. So Elijah climbed to the top of Mount Carmel, bowed to the ground, and prayed for rain. Then he sent his servant to look toward the sea. The servant came back and said, "There's nothing there." Now Elijah could have stopped right there. He could have said, "Well, I prayed, but nothing happened." But instead he said, "Go look again." And he did this 7 times. 7 times he prayed, 7 times he believed, 7 times he sent his servant back, expecting to see something. And on the 7th time, the servant came back and said, "I see a cloud as small as a man's hand." That little cloud was the sign that the rain was coming. Do you have that kind of persistence? Do you have the kind of faith that says, "I will pray again, I will try again, I will believe again, I will keep knocking, keep seeking, keep expecting until I see the promise come to pass"? Because persistence is what brings results. Persistent faith is what makes walls fall. Persistent faith is what brings impossible to become possible. Persistent faith is what causes the impossible to become possible. And let me tell you, when you refuse to quit, when you keep pressing forward, even when it's hard, even when it's tiring, even when it feels like nothing is changing, God honors that kind of faith. Because the Bible says in Galatians 6:9, "Do not grow weary in well-doing, for in due season you will reap a harvest if you do not give up." But the key is, if you do not give up, that means you can't quit in the waiting. You can't give up in the middle. You can't throw in the towel because the journey is harder than you expected. Because God is faithful, and if he said it, he will do it. If he promised it, he will bring it to pass. But you have to hold on. You have to keep going. You have to keep pushing, because there is power in persistence. My brothers and sisters, you may be standing in front of a door that will not open. You may have prayed, fasted, cried, and waited, but nothing has changed. You may have knocked until your knuckles bled, spoken faith until your voice grew weak, and believed until your heart felt weary, and yet the door remains shut. But let me remind you, a closed door does not mean a closed destiny. God is not ignoring you. God has not forgotten you. He is not deaf to your cries, nor is he blind to your struggle. But sometimes what looks like a denial is actually divine direction. What feels like a delay is actually divine development. What seems like rejection is actually redirection to something greater. Because we serve a God who never closes a door without a purpose, and never leaves you standing in a hallway without a plan. Maybe the door won't open because it's the wrong door. Maybe it won't open because the timing isn't right. Maybe it won't open because God is calling you to move, to push, to act, to step out in faith instead of waiting for something to fall into place. Or maybe, just maybe, the door won't open because God has already prepared another way, another opportunity, another breakthrough that you haven't even considered yet. So don't give up in frustration. Don't settle in disappointment. Don't let the enemy convince you that because one door didn't open, your promise has been canceled. If God has spoken a word over your life, it will come to pass. But sometimes, before the door opens, he needs to prepare you for what's on the other side. Sometimes before the breakthrough comes, he needs to build up your endurance, your faith, your obedience, your trust. Sometimes before the miracle happens, he needs to see if you will still worship, still believe, still stand. So keep praying, but also keep moving. Keep believing, but also keep knocking. Keep seeking, but also keep listening. And above all, trust that if the door of prayer won't open, then the God who holds the keys has something even greater in store for you.